Welcome to the Essential Keys to Ecstatic Birth. This is an introduction to opening to pleasure in childbirth. And this is such necessary information because most women, if you say to them, hey, you can enjoy childbirth, they'll look at you like you are crazy. What are you talking about? That is not the association that we currently have with childbirth. So I'm very excited to share this presentation with you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story so you can get some context as to how I came to be doing this work and why it's so relevant and I'm so passionate about it. So all of this work really stemmed from my own experience birthing my babies. My babies are now 12, 13, and 16. So it was a while ago. But when I was pregnant with my first baby, my little boy, I was amazed by the power of my body. I was amazed that my body knew just what to do to gestate life. And I wanted to feel that in birth. I wanted to feel that like inner wisdom, that primal power in my birth, but I really didn't know how to create that. And I didn't really have any context for it. I didn't come from a family where natural childbirth was in our legacy, or I didn't live in a community where I saw that around me. It was just something that came from within. And so I kind of looked around and I said, I think I want a midwife for my birth. And my husband, being the very supportive man that he is, said, that's fine, Sheila, as long as you're with the best doctor at the best hospital. Now, I was new to the birth world. I didn't even know that that was like a tall order. I didn't understand the politics of birth. I didn't understand what it meant to be with a doctor in a hospital or to be with a midwife in a hospital or in a different location. I looked around and I saw that I couldn't really meet those parameters. And so I asked a friend of mine who seemed to have a good birth for a recommendation, and I hired her OB and kind of went like this. I wished upon a star. I did take a natural childbirth class. I took the Bradley method, which, at the time that was like the most comprehensive childbirth education class that you could take. So I did have that info. And when my teacher very lovingly tried to encourage me to look at my birthing choices, I just couldn't do it. I was too triggered by it. So I did learn to labor at home, and I had a gorgeous, natural, primal labor at home. My husband and I were in and out of the shower, and it felt like raw and it felt real. And when the time came to transfer, things started to kind of downward spiral from there, because just in the act of transferring to the hospital, I was disrupting my labor process. And we got there, and there were they call it the cascade of interventions. I had to be on a monitor and I had to lie down. And anyway, to make a long story short, I did not have an ecstatic birth. I did not have the natural birth that I had wished for. In fact, the birth experience I had was really scary and it was pretty traumatic. I ended up, I did have the epidural. I pushed for 4 hours. And at the end, I got an episiotomy and my baby was vacuumed out. And the disconnect was so big that there was this moment in my labor when I was feeling this urge to push, and I was told that I wasn't allowed to, and that I had to wait until the monitoring was done. And by then they came to check me. They said to me, Sheila, you're only 5 centimeters dilated. And to me, I was like, I went from this place of feeling deeply connected to my body to being like, well, then if that's the case, I don't even know what's real and what's not. And I just kind of handed over governance of my body and my birthing process. And then even after this delivery, not really understanding what had happened, I remember my husband and I turned to each other and said, thank God we were in the hospital. Thank God, everybody there. And they really did. The people that were around us really did their best to support us in the way that they were trained. But it wasn't until later on that I realized that it was the very conditions that we were put in that caused kind of that downward spiral in my experience. And I really had this big disconnect between between me and my body, between me and my body's wisdom after that. And to the point that I couldn't actually even get pregnant again. I had, over the next couple of years, I had a series of losses, and one was kind of more heartbreaking than the next. I had a few miscarriages and then one really, really sad loss. And it was at that point that I had to reevaluate and say, like, what the heck is going on? You know, I went through all these doctors, I went to all these natural healers, I had all of these tests done, and everyone said to me, it's just bad luck. And I knew that something had to shift. I didn't know what that was. And lo and behold, I landed in the living room of a woman in New York City named Regina Thomashower, who runs the school for women called Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts. And it was in her living room that I learned this concept that my body had wisdom. And when I turned to my body and I asked my body, what's going on? Like, why am I experiencing all of these losses? My body said to me really clearly, I'm not ready to have another baby. I'm still healing from the first. And that was really like the beginning of me reclaiming my connection to my body, reclaiming my connection to my inner wisdom. And all of a sudden I realized, yeah, it's true. I was running my life from my headspace. You know, I had grown up 9 years apart from my younger brother. And as soon as I had my first baby, I thought to myself, well, I don't want this baby to be lonely the way I was, so I'm going to get pregnant again right away. And, you know, I never paused to think or feel, is this the right choice for me? I was being governed by thoughts and ideas that were outside of my own truth. So in Regina Thomashower's living room, I learned about my body wisdom. I learned about the power of pleasure in my body, and I really healed that rift that had occurred in my first birth. And so when I was ready, when my body gave me the green light, I got pregnant again, no problem. And this time I left no stone unturned. I was determined to have that beautiful primal birthing experience that I wanted to have the first time. And this time I trained body, mind, heart, soul, everything I could think of in order to prepare for this birth I did. And it was a reclamation. I had this beautiful Zen-like birth experience. I was with a midwife at a birthing center. I labored in water. I was supported. It was really everything I could have dreamed of and more. And this time, when the time came to push, I felt everything. I felt everything. And there was this moment as I was pushing, and I was fascinated by the sensation of my baby's head descending down the vaginal canal, when I felt my vulva expand and contract. I was like, oh my God, it's true. Like in all the natural birth books I had ever read, there would always be like one line that said something like, some women experience heightened states of bliss, ecstasy, and even orgasm when they give birth. Just one line. And in that moment, I knew it was true. I knew that women could experience that kind of pleasure in childbirth. But of course, as soon as I thought it, I went out of my body and into my head. And anyway, I had a beautiful delivery with my second child, my daughter. And the difference postpartum was palpable. You know, the first time postpartum, it was really hard to get up out of a chair, to move around. I was swollen. I looked like I had gotten beat up. It took me months and months to heal and start to feel like myself again. This time, I felt so vibrant. I felt so healthy. I felt so sensual, so alive as a woman. It was really an incredible contrast. And with that came like the joy that I brought to my mothering, the joy that I brought to my postpartum period, which was really, really new for me. And so when I got pregnant the third time, I thought to myself, okay, I know I can do this. I know I could have this beautiful, primal, like body connected experience giving birth, but I wanted to know if I could enjoy it. Because even though like I had the, you know, like the blissful aftermath of my second birth, I couldn't say that I had really enjoyed labor, right? And I wanted to see if that was possible. And so the third time around, I consciously, actively trained my body for labor. And take a sip of water here. I prepared my body for pleasure. Excuse me. And And I was still very involved with the School for Pleasure in New York City, and I was very struck by the fact that a lot of the tools and practices to feel more pleasure in your body, to expand the pleasure in your body, to be really connected to the sensations in your body, was one and the same as what I had learned about natural birth. So I put all of that into my birth prep for my third birth, and what I experienced was actually, it way transcended my own conception of what was possible. So even though I had prepared for this, very sensual birth, as birth often does, I had a very different experience. My labor was really pokey, and so we started with movement and things like that. And I actually was not interested in the moment, in the water, the tub of water that was there for me to birth in. I was not interested in being touched in any way. So my husband put on some music and I started dancing. And in that dance, I was so deeply connected to the sensations of my body. It felt like the contractions were this dance partner and come and overtake me and kind of leave me pulsing on the floor and then come back up. And that was how I moved through my labor. That labor took me higher than I had ever been in my life. And that was how I birthed my baby. And afterwards, I remember feeling really emotional, like here I was. I had prepared for pleasure in childbirth, but what had actually occurred was something beyond what I had even conceived of. And I felt like, well, why didn't I know? Why didn't I know what was possible in birth? And why don't women know? Why don't all women know what's possible in birth? So that began my career as an ecstatic birth advocate, as a teacher. I've been working with expectant moms since then. It's been, just over 10 years now. And in the last 5 years, I've also started training birth practitioners to bring this work to their clients. So that's been really, really exciting. The ecstatic birth movement is really a global movement. I work with women all around the world and birth practitioners all around the world, because this is something, the reclamation of our connection to our bodies and our sexuality and our sensuality in childbirth is a movement that really has to happen all around the globe. So that's me, and I would like to start our presentation. I'm going to pull up the slideshow now and guide you through the essential keys. All right, here we go. The essential keys to ecstatic birth. All right, I want you to just put your hands on your belly right now. Close your eyes if you like, and just breathe this in. Childbirth can be one of the most empowering, transformative, and potentially pleasurable events in a woman's life. Breathe that in. Yeah. So I gave you a bit of my story, and so this is sort of the trajectory of my career and where you can find me. The Ecstatic Birth Training Sessions is a digital product that I launched, which includes many of my teachers who I'll introduce to you shortly. And the Ecstatic Birth Practitioner is a year-long training that I offer to birth practitioners. And you can find me online at ecstatic-birth.com. All right, these are some of my teachers. Dr. Christiane Northrup is a woman's wellness advocate and OBGYN. She's really a revolutionary and thought leader in the women's health movement. And she has had my back from the get-go with this work. This is really a continuation of her lifelong work to bring awareness to women about their connections between themselves and their body's wisdom. So she is a beloved friend and mentor. Regina Thomashower, who I mentioned earlier, who runs Mama Gina School of Womanly Arts. She's the New York Times bestselling author of the book Pussy. And it was in her living room that this journey began for me. And I am one of many, many women who have really been deeply influenced by her work in the world of pleasure and have brought it, I've brought it to the world of childbirth. Many women have brought it to their own, their own unique way in their own worlds and work that they do. And then Deborah Pascali-Bonaro, she is a top-level doula trainer, birth advocate, and the director and writer of the documentary Orgasmic Birth, the book by the same name. She and I collaborate frequently. We are on that same mission to raise awareness that pleasure is actually an inherent part of our design in childbirth. These are some of my mentors. So when you work with me, you get the benefit of their wisdom as well. I'm very proud to be supported by such incredible women. So let's begin, like right at the very beginning, to understand ecstasy, right? If I was to say to you, when was the last time that you felt ecstatic? Just take a moment and think about, like, when was the last time that you felt ecstatic? I would probably get as many different answers as there are people watching this presentation, right? For some people, it might be in nature, for some in the bedroom, for some with their kids, for some at a music event, right? Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines ecstasy as a state of very great happiness, extreme delight, a state of overwhelming emotion, especially rapturous delight. It's also defined as a trance state, a mystic or prophetic trance. So my definition is a state of bliss that has emotional, physical, and spiritual components. So you can see in these definitions, there's nothing tied to where you are, what you're doing. If I was to say to you, the last time you experienced ecstasy, what did it feel like? Then we would start to get some commonalities, right? You can see that ecstasy is a feeling state. It's not a state that, like you have to be in a certain position or in a certain location. So I say this to you because I often get the question of like, what's an ecstatic birth? Are you advocating for home birth? Are you advocating for natural birth? Are you advocating for water birth? What is it exactly? What does it look like? And the answer to that is it's yes, all of it. An ecstatic birth is the birth that's right for you. And it is really about like how you feel about your birth. Too many women walk away from their births feeling victimized or traumatized in some way or disconnected from their bodies or disempowered. So those are all kind of like the antithesis of ecstasy. I want women to walk away from their births feeling like, wow, initiated in the glorious rite of passage that is childhood, to walk into motherhood, feeling empowered, feeling really deeply connected to their inner wisdom, really connected to their bodies, to walk into motherhood feeling great, feeling joyous, feeling happy, right? How would your childhood have been different had your mother been more empowered, more joyous? Everybody can kind of begin to understand that. This is really, really powerful. Childbirth holds the potential for emotional, physical, and spiritual pleasure. Emotional pleasure, let's start there. You're expanding your family, you're getting this beautiful baby into your life. I think most of us can understand the potential for emotional pleasure. This is like, it's a rite of passage. This is such a big moment in a family's life, right? In a parent's life. So emotional pleasure, physical pleasure, we're going to dive really deep into this because that's the piece I think most people really struggle with the most. How can childbirth be physically pleasurable? How is that even possible? Well, I'm going to give you the short answer now, and we're going to dive more deeply into it. But the short answer is you birth your baby with the same parts of your body that you make the baby with, right? It seems like a very simplistic concept, but actually most of us have that like compartmentalized into different parts of our mind. We don't really process childbirth in that way. But if you take a moment and think about it, like the same way that you can experience pleasure in conception, it's entirely possible to experience pleasure when you're giving birth. And just like you can really enjoy sex or not, you can really enjoy birth or not. So let's plant that seed. It's like, okay, well, why wouldn't you enjoy sex? Usually it has to do with the body not being honored in some way, right? And that's really what's happening in childbirth on a really global scale. So we're going to come back to that idea of like physical pleasure in childbirth in just a little bit, but I wanted to plant that seed for you. And then spiritual pleasure, I mean, you are bringing new life onto the planet. There is a new being coming to the earth through your body. Like, that is as spiritual as it gets. And this is a moment where in many traditional cultures and religious cultures, it's a moment of like profound prayer, profound connection with the universe and all that is. So that's really an important component there. And so childbirth can really have these different layers of pleasure accessible through it. So the 3 essential keys that we're going to go through today, the 3 essential keys to opening to pleasure in childbirth. The first is consciousness. The second is inner wisdom. And the third is pleasure and sexuality. So we're going to dive deeply into each of these as we move forward. So the first one is consciousness. So let's look at where we are now in the shadow side, right? Where do we have to bring light to our consciousness around birth? Most women, when you ask them, like, when you think about childbirth, what's the first word that comes to mind? I've done this in rooms of women from, like high school kids to intergenerational groups of women as in their 80s and 90s. And inevitably, the number one word that comes to mind when women think of childbirth is pain. So that is like the consciousness that we're holding right now. And that's really, it's really reinforced by our cultural messages, our religious inheritance, right? That story of like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. No matter what religion you do or don't believe in, there's this story, their creation story, that tells us that because Eve took a bite of that apple back in the Garden of Eden, women are forever punished and deemed to suffer in childbirth. Like, that is how deep the roots go. This idea that women are supposed to suffer in childbirth. And then, of course, it's like reinforced by the media and all the messages that we get. The stories women tell, right? Like the horror stories that we hear women share about birth. So all of that leads us into a place where there's a lot of fear that dominates how we relate to childbirth, a lot of fear about how we make our decisions, about where we want to birth and with whom, a lot of fear that people around us have for us, a lot of fear about what can happen to us in birth. So that's, right now, that piece of fear is really up front and center in terms of our consciousness around childbirth. And then this feeling of like overwhelming powerlessness, like there's a feeling that us as birthing women need to be rescued from birth by providers, by the medical system, by those people around us, that it's not, there are very few women that hold that position of power in the birthing room, but instead it's, our babies get delivered as opposed to we birth our babies. There's this feeling of like powerlessness in birth. These are all this is the shadow side of our current consciousness around birth. Okay, so where do we want to go? Step 1, we need to wake up. So you're here, you're watching this presentation, you're aware of this idea known as ecstatic birth, you're exploring the idea of opening to pleasure in childbirth. So that's amazing. You're already in the solution. That first step is you need to know what your options are. You need to know what your possibilities are. If you don't know what they are, then you don't have them, right? So it comes back to that initial feeling I had after giving birth. It's like, why didn't I know? Why don't women know what's possible in birth? And this consciousness piece is really huge. I can't tell you how many times I'll be talking about ecstatic birth. I'll be talking about pleasure in childbirth, and women will come up to me afterwards and say, thank you. I'm pretty sure I had an orgasm when I birthed my baby, and I was so ashamed all these years, right? So like, even though they had that like incredible experience, they couldn't even enjoy it because they were not awake to the idea that not only is this possible, but it's a part of your body's process. Next, I'm a big believer in knowledge is power. We have way too many women. I would say the statistics on childbirth ed are something like 15 to 20% of women take a childbirth education class. Like, that is abysmal. If you don't even know like how your body works, if you don't know the stages of labor, if you're not taking the time to educate yourself, it's like, well, of course you're going to be going down this path of the unknown that's going to feel really scary to you because you don't really understand what's coming. But if you know the stages of labor, if you understand how labor flows, if you understand how to support the process of labor, well, that's really empowering. And then all of a sudden you can have tools to support you. You can prepare to support yourself. So I'm a big believer in, education, both mental education and body training and education, which is the gift that I have to offer. Then this idea about planning for pleasure, right? We talked about how most women kind of just abdicate their bodies, just like I did in my first birth. I'm not judging, but like we don't really ever think of childbirth as an opportunity to celebrate ourselves as we become mothers, right? This is a really momentous occasion in your life. Even more so, I would argue, than your wedding. And yet for your wedding, you plan every detail for your pleasure and you don't feel guilty about it at all. But there's something about our culture and when it comes to mothering, we're kind of taught to self-abdicate. Okay, I'm giving it up for my baby. But the thing is that you and your baby are inextricably intertwined. Right? So your experience, it really matters, not just in childbirth, it really matters all through your motherhood. So let's stop our self-abdicating behaviors and let's plan for pleasure. Let's give this moment the weight it deserves in our lives. Like it's a moment, it's a rite of passage. It's a moment in which you're welcoming a new member of your family. Your experience matters. Think about like what would delight you? What do you want to see? What do you want to hear? What do you want to feel? Plan for pleasure. And we're going to talk about how actually that supports the birthing process as well. But I just want to put that into your consciousness too. And then the fears. Oh my gosh, we talked about the fears. Now, we live in a culture, we're in the age of the secret, right? Which teaches us that whatever we give our attention to is how we create our reality. So I find that especially in the realm of childbirth, even those like super conscious women that I love to work with, a lot of times will not want to look at their fears for that reason, because they don't want to look at their fears, because if they look at their fears, then they're giving their fears power. But here's the thing, is your fears don't just live in your mind. Your fears also are in your body. They're in your tissues. So not looking at your fears, it doesn't get rid of them because they're still in your body, and the birthing process happens in the body. So I really work with women to look their fears in the eye, get really clear and conscious about their fears and disarm their fears. Because otherwise, if you don't take the time to disarm your fears are going to be running the show at childbirth. And that is not a good place to be, because with fear, it disrupts the birthing process. And lastly, this idea of recreating your birthing culture. I talked about how our birthing culture gives us so many negative images around birth. And the truth is that your childbirth education began the day that you were born, and you've been soaking in all these messages your whole life. So in order to create an ecstatic birth, which is a birth that's very different from like what you typically see and hear about, you need to consciously recreate that. You need to soak yourself in positive birthing images, positive birth stories. Surround yourself with people that can hold that vision for you, for people that are skilled in supporting you in that. It's very difficult to have an ecstatic birth experience when you're surrounded by people who hold a very different vision of childbirth. So really consciously recreate your birthing culture, reprogram your subconscious with positive images, positive birth stories. We're so lucky. We live in the age of the internet. All of that is available to you at your fingertips. You can Google ecstatic birth, pleasure in birth, natural birth, orgasmic birth, any of these, and you'll be flooded with beautiful images and stories of birth. And then be really fierce about your providers and create a birthing culture that's worthy of your desires. Have people around you supporting you that can really hold that vision for an ecstatic birth for you. All right, key number 2 is your inner wisdom. So currently the shadow side that is more dominant in our culture. We talked about how fear dominates our birth preparation, birth planning. It also dominates our birth experiences. So what do I mean by that? So when you experience fear in the body, birth is a body trip, fear literally makes your body contract. Like think about something you're scared of, your body tends to grip, to contract as we brace ourselves against the fear. Now, just the act of contracting in this way, it disrupts your blood flow. It disrupts your energy flow. All of that constriction is actually disrupting the flow of labor. So fear, when that's the dominant thing driving your birth, that's a dominant experience in your body in relation to birth, it's actually disconnecting you from your body's wisdom. And that is unfortunately how most women are giving birth, in this fearful state. And then, culturally also, like, we don't really value body wisdom. We really value like rational, like brain, mind-centered decision-making and thought. And overwhelmingly, I think this is starting to change a little bit, but most of us have been raised in a culture that actually distrusts the body. Like our bodies betray us in some way. Our bodies don't work right. We don't trust our body. So birth, again, it's a full body trip. So this is something that we really need to reclaim for ourselves so that we can trust our body. Our bodies are capable of this, and to really follow the wisdom of the body as opposed to the wisdom of the mind, because your mind can't, like, you can't think your way through birth. It just doesn't work that way. And the result of this is that many women enter motherhood feeling victimized by their births, or even they feel traumatized, like physically or emotionally, by the birth experiences they had. And that's just not a good way to enter motherhood. So we want to reclaim this idea that our bodies have wisdom, right? Our bodies have our primal wisdom. They have our ancestral wisdom. They have our experiential wisdom, like all the experiences we've had our entire life. Like all of those are stored in our muscle memory in our bodies. And our bodies also integrate our mental, rational wisdom. So it's all there, all integrated. Whereas when you're making decisions with your mind, you're only taking that into account. Your bodies have a wisdom that integrates all of it. So we really need to learn how to connect to that and learn the language of the body, which is sensation, right? So let's just take a moment and really connect. You can close your eyes if you like, and just notice, like, what's your body feeling like right now? What are the sensations in your body? Just notice what you feel. You can open your eyes if you like. I know that seems like absurdly simple, and it really is that simple. It's like to be able to connect to the sensations in our body and have them guide us, as opposed to most of us will think our way through our day. This is what I have to do next. This is, we make our decisions from a headspace. I want you to start feeling your way through. When you feel the sensations in your body, you can move towards what feels better. And this is relevant on so many levels. For example, if you're choosing between practitioners, like, how do you navigate that? One practitioner might have more qualifications or might make more sense, but when you're in the presence of that practitioner, you don't feel very good. So that it might make more sense, but it's not the right choice for you. So you want to start to navigate your decisions from your feeling space, and trusting that, like, your body wants to feel good. And this is the space where, if you are adept at this and you are connected to your body, you've practiced this, you can follow the sensations in your body, then you've got all the guidance you need to birth your baby. Because when you're in that space where you're deeply connected to your body and the sensations, you will move the way you need to move to birth your baby. So this is really big. And if you're thinking, oh, I'm not disconnected from my body, I really challenge you to think about that. Like, if you've ever, put off going to the bathroom or skipped a meal because you're too busy, like, I think we've all been there. Like, these are places where our culture really trains us to kind of disassociate from our bodies and function from our heads. Like, most of us use our bodies as a way to move our head from place to place. So start making that shift in little things like, what do I want to have for lunch? Well, which one feels better in my body? What clothes do I want to wear? Which one feels better in my body? Instead of what makes more sense, you want to go with what feels better. So, like I said, this supports you in your birth preparation, navigating your options. It supports you in the physical process of birth, following the flow of labor. And it also supports you in mothering, because as a mother, you're going to get advice from like a gazillion different sources, and they're going to contradict each other. And what are you going to follow? Like, you're going to follow what makes the most sense for your baby, what feels right to you, right? So as a mother, you have to intuit for your baby. So this is a really vital skill to have. Okay, so key number 3, pleasure and sexuality. That's the third key to enjoying childbirth. And here is the shadow side where we reside. Currently, there's a huge disconnect between our sexual body and our birthing body. Like, we don't think of our birthing body as remotely related to our sexual body, even though it's all the same body, it's all the same body parts. And as a result, we're really dishonoring the body's processes in the way we birth, and the way we treat birth, and the way we treat our birthing moms. This, the messages that we've internalized our entire life about our body, whether we have shame, whether, we have trauma in our lives, these things will derail labor and delivery. So the more we can reclaim our sexuality, our sensual selves, the more we're actually supporting the process of labor and delivery. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. But in this world that we live in, unfortunately, there's a lot of disconnect between women and their bodies. There's a lot of feelings of shame, especially in relation to our sexuality. And unfortunately, a lot of women have experienced sexual trauma in their lifetime, and that does derail the process of labor and delivery. The result of all of this is the sensation of pain and the result of trauma in childbirth, which I don't want for you. I don't want that for any woman. So let's turn that around by claiming birth is a sexual act. Woo! Okay, birth is a sexual act. Like, how does that make you feel? That was a really triggery statement for me for a long time. Like, it took me a long time to be able to say that, and even longer time to be able to say it out loud without kind of like inwardly cringing. Birth is a sexual act. That is like the first major piece of reclamation. We birth with the same body parts. We have a similar hormonal flow, and we are accessing the same trance states that we access when we are having sex and enjoying our bodies and enjoying all the pleasure available to us in our bodies. The difference is everything is magnified in birth. The sensations are magnified. The amount you have to open, your body is magnified. Everything is magnified. But when you're not honoring birth as a sexual act, like if you think about, okay, if you have sex in fear, how's that going to feel? Ouch, right? If you have sex in ways that are not honoring your body, like if you're not engorged, if you don't have if you're not feeling turned on, how's sex going to feel? Ouch, right? So this is the way we're birthing. We're birthing in fear. We're birthing under conditions where like our bodies are not turned on or engorged. And that is contributing to the sensation of pain in birth. Another piece of it is like you have more energy flowing through you in childbirth than you have at any other time in your life. And so if you've ever had energy work, the way energy work works is like you have a certain way you run your patterns in your body, and that increased energy flow will bring up what's not serving you, what's not serving your health or your process to be cleared. And that can sometimes be intense. And if your pattern is to resist that, then you're going to be resisting birth. You're going to be resisting the flow. This is why we want to clear a lot of the triggers ahead of birth, or a lot of the triggers around our sexuality, any kind of shame we feel, or, if we have any trauma, we want to clear that as much as possible ahead of birth, so that when you have that massive energy flow in birth, it can move through you without bringing up those triggers and you having to process or resist those triggers in the birthing room. We want to create conditions to support the body's processes. So just like you think about, okay, under what conditions can I open in pleasure in the bedroom? Or when I'm having sex, what are the conditions that support my optimal pleasure, that allow me to surrender, that allow the energy to flow through me? You want to create those same conditions to support the body's processes in birth. So for a lot of people, that's going to look like feeling safe, right? Dim lighting, feeling loved, connected, right? And then there's that engorgement, the blood flow, the turn on that we talked about earlier too. Most people are not consciously bringing those things into childbirth. And so just like if you're going to have sex when you're not engorged or you're not turned on, and that's going to hurt, that's how women are delivering their babies. This is magnified to the 10th degree. Of course it's going to hurt. When your tissues are full of blood flow, they're pliable, they stretch, it can feel good, it can feel satisfying. But when they're not, that stretching, it's gonna burn, it's gonna rip your tissues, that's gonna hurt. So as much as possible, you wanna create the conditions to support the body's processes when you're birthing. And then I love this idea of sensual expansion as birth prep. And this is really at the heart of the work I do with women one-on-one, and the work that I do in Oh Baby, which is my program that supports women to prepare for pleasure in childbirth. So let me explain. The language of sensual expansion, the tools of sensual expansion, the focus. So sensual expansion is the process of learning to feel more in your body, feel more pleasure, learn to orgasm, learn to expand your orgasm, learn to have multiple orgasms. All of that is actually one and the same as the process that we need to prepare for birth with. And it's a lot of the same tools that actually you learn in natural childbirth classes. It's just the focus is not specifically on pleasure in the same way. But here's the thing, is if you're training your body to allow greater amounts of energy flow, which is something you learn in sensual expansion, if you are training your body to be able to access pleasure, which stimulates the hormone oxytocin, which governs labor and delivery, which supports your flow in birth, you're supporting your birth through pleasurable means. So you can actually, preparing your body for pleasure prepares your body for birth. It's really one and the same. And the tools, breathing, sounding, movement, these are tools we're already using in natural birth. So if we can just tweak them and bring that pleasure aspect and bring the turn on aspect to help us with the oxytocin flow. Oxytocin, by the way, is, if you ever heard of Pitocin, which is the drug that pharmaceutical companies have developed to jumpstart your labor, if you need to be induced, if you need to speed your labor along, they'll give you Pitocin. That is the pharmaceutical version of oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone that your body secretes when you experience pleasure. So sensual expansion is actually a really, really powerful birth prep tool. Now, there's a lot of talk about orgasmic birth. What's an orgasmic birth? Is the whole point of this so that women can have a great big orgasm in birth? And the answer to that is no. It's kind of like when women come to me and they say, oh, I want to have an orgasmic birth. No, that's besides the point. The point of all of this is not so that you have this giant climactic orgasm as you're birthing your baby, although that's totally possible and all the power to you if that happens. It's besides the point. Orgasms, pleasure, sensual pleasure are really powerful birth tools because of what I mentioned earlier. It stimulates the oxytocin flow in your body. So using pleasure consciously as a tool in birth, it's really, really powerful. And then, yes, some women will have orgasms as part of the spontaneous flow of birth, and that is possible the more open you are and surrendered you are to that flow of energy moving through you in birth. All right, so we've completed our 3 essential keys. The key takeaways I want you to have from our time together today is childbirth is something a woman can enjoy rather than endure. And childbirth has an enormous potential for ecstatic pleasure on many levels, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And lastly, childbirth can be one of the most empowering, transformative, and potentially pleasurable events in a woman's life. Spread the word. People need to know. So for those of you that are interested in really taking a dive, I would like to introduce you to my program called Oh Baby. Oh Baby is a revolutionary program to prepare for pleasure in childbirth. We do a lot of that sensual expansion work that I was talking about earlier. So it transforms your relationship to your body, to your pleasure, to your sensuality, and ultimately to childbirth as a result. You get a ton of information, mindset shifts, and above all, like tools and practices. Really simple tools and practices that you can begin using today and take into the birthing room to help you access that flow of pleasure, support the flow of your labor and delivery so that you can enjoy birthing your baby. And finally, this opens the doorways not just for ecstatic birth, but for ecstatic mothering. Like I started off saying, too many women are entering motherhood. This is like a rite of passage, right? Childbirth is this rite of passage into motherhood. And too many women are getting through that rite of passage feeling powerless, depleted, traumatized. I don't want that. I don't want that for women. I want you to be able to show up for your baby feeling healthy, feeling vibrant, feeling connected to your inner wisdom, feeling joyful, and really like mothering from that place. Could you imagine if everyone was mothering their babies from that place? I think we could change the planet in a generation or two easily. So this was really, really powerful work, and something, if you would like to go deeper, I encourage you to check out Oh Baby. You can find it at ecstatic-birth.com/ohbaby, and you will also get the link and the follow-up emails from watching this presentation, so you don't have to worry about like scrambling and writing all that down. And then finally, I also offer private ecstatic birth training. So this is one-on-one sessions, me and you, dedicated to you, your unique desires, your unique circumstances. You know, every woman is different. Everyone has like their own set of like desires and fears and experiences and parameters through which they're navigating. And so the private ecstatic birth sessions are really for you, and we create a custom training plan for you, for your body and your birth. And included in the private ecstatic birth training is access to Oh Baby, as well as the ecstatic birth book. So I do only work with a very limited number of women one-on-one. I do 5 at a time. And so if you're interested in that, send me an email, Sheila@ecstatic-birth.com, so we can have a conversation and see if we're a good fit to work together. All right, my dears, so we're going to stop this presentation here. Thank you for watching the Essential Keys to Ecstatic Birth with me. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation, and I'm excited to see where you take it. I really encourage you to share this information with the people in your communities, with family members who'll be at your birth, with birth providers. Like, this is really, it's important to create that bubble around you, to create that birthing culture so that you can have the experience that you want to have. And as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, Sheila@ecstatic-birth.com.